Chapter 2. It was a wonderfully beautiful day, and Nils had never seen the sky so blue as the migratory birds came racing by. They had flown over the Baltic Sea and were heading north. They must have been all kinds of birds, but the only ones he recognized were the wild geese flying in two long lines in the shape of a plow. He could hear them calling up there, "On to the mountains! On to the mountains!" The wild geese suddenly caught sight of the tame geese down on the farm, and they flew closer to the ground and cried, "Come with us! Come with us! To the mountains! To the mountains!" But the tame geese sensibly replied, "Things are quite fine here for us." Yes, it was an unusually lovely day, and it must have been a great joy to fly through the air. So for every new skein of wild geese flying by, the tame geese grew more and more uneasy, and flapped their wings as if they wished to leave too. "What madness!" said the old mother goose. "That lot will soon be both hungry and cold." However, in one of the young ganders, the cries from the wild geese had aroused an uncontrollable desire to travel. When another skein flew by and called, "Come with us, come with us," he replied, "Wait, I'm coming." He spread out his wings and tried to rise, but he was so unused to flying he fell to the ground again. The wild geese turned and flew more slowly to see if he would have another try. Nils Goose Boy saw and heard all this as he lay there on the stone wall. It would be terrible if the gander flew away, he said to himself. It would upset Mother and Father greatly if he'd gone when they came back from church. Again, he quite forgot he was small and helpless. He jumped down right into the middle of the flock of geese and flung his arm around the gander's neck. "Don't you go flying away," he cried. But at that very moment the gander had found out how to take off from the ground, and now he couldn't stop and shake off the boy, so Nils had to go up into the air with him. Everything happened so quickly, it took his breath away. Before he had even thought of letting go of the gander's neck, they were so high up he would have been killed if he had fallen to the ground. All he could do was to wiggle his way up onto the gander's back. Even then, it was no easy task hanging on to that slippery back between those sweeping wings. He had to thrust both hands deep down into his feathers so as not to fall off. Nils grew so dizzy that for a long while he didn't know where he was, the air whistling and hissing round him and roaring in the feathers like a proper storm. 13 geese flapping and cackling all round him. In the end, he came to his senses enough to realize he ought to find out where the geese were taking him. But he didn't dare look down, for he would surely turn giddy if he tried. Yet the wild geese were flying fairly low because their new traveling companion couldn't breathe in the thin air higher up, so for his sake they flew a little more slowly than usual. Gradually, the boy made himself glance down in the direction of the earth. To him it seemed as if a large cloth had been laid out beneath him and divided up into an incredible number of large and small squares, corners and straight edges everywhere, nothing round or crooked. "What kind of checkered cloth is that?" he said to himself, not expecting anyone to reply. But the wild geese at once cried, "Fields and meadows! Fields and meadows!" He was racing across the flat plain of skein. The bright green squares were fields of rye that had been sown the autumn before, and had stayed green beneath the snow. The yellowish-gray ones were stubble fields, the brown ones clover, and the dark squares pastures or plowed fields. Some dark squares with gray in the middle were farms, the green squares their gardens. The boy couldn't help laughing. He had always liked riding fast and wildly, but he had never before known such a speed as this, and he had never thought it could be so fresh and free as it was up here in the air. And what a good smell of soil and resin could rise from the earth. Being carried along as high as this was like flying away from all his troubles and annoyances. The great tame gander was very proud and happy as he flew over the plain of Skane and in the company of the wild geese. But as the day wore on, he began to tire and fell several goose lengths behind the others. Then the goose flying last called to the leader goose at the front, "Aka, aka, from Kebnekaise, the white one is falling behind." "Tell him it's much easier to fly more quickly than slowly," replied the leader goose, and went on as before. The gander did try, but he grew more and more exhausted and started sinking. "Aka, aka from Kebnekaise, the white one is falling." "Anyone who can't keep up should turn round and go home," cried Aka, not slowing down in the slightest. "Oh, so that's how it is," thought the gander. They had tempted him to go with them just for fun, and they had no intention of taking him to Lapland. Then he wouldn't be able to show these tramps that a tame goose could also do a thing or two. It annoyed him in particular because he had known about Aka from Kebnekaise before. Although he was a domestic goose, he had nevertheless heard about this leader goose, who was over 100 years old. She was very much respected, but more than anything else, she and her flock despised the tame geese. He would have liked to show them that he was their equal. Then suddenly the little fellow on his back said, "Please, Martin, you must see that you, who've never flown before, can't possibly go with them all the way up to Lapland. Turn back before you wear yourself out." Did the wretch think he couldn't manage? The gander could think of nothing worse than this stripling, and he was so annoyed now. He decided he would stick it out. "If you say another word, I'll throw you off," he hissed, and flew on almost as quickly as the others. But now the sun was sinking fast, and the geese set off downwards. Before the boy and the gander knew where they were standing on the shores of Lake Vom. The great lake was almost covered with a thin layer of ice full of holes and cracks, and round the ice ran a belt of gleaming black water. Where the geese had landed was a pine forest with frozen snow beneath the bushy, prickly branches. The boy was so agitated he wanted to cry out loud. He was hungry. He hadn't eaten anything all day. And where would he get food from? Who would find him somewhere to sleep, warm him, and protect him from wild animals? The forest started rustling and creaking, fear creeping up in the wake of the dusk, the happy mood he had been in up there in the air now gone. In his anxiety, he looked around for his traveling companion, for he had no one else to be with. But the gander was lying quite still, as if dying, his neck drooping and his eyes closed, and the boy, who had previously been so unkind to animals, now grew terribly afraid of losing the gander. He started pushing him to get him down to the water, though the gander was large and heavy. The boy had to use all his strength, but at last the gander slid into the water head first. His beak soon appeared out of the water, and he snorted, then swam away towards the reeds. When he turned back again, he had a little perch in his beak. That's a little fish. "Here you are, and thanks for helping me," he said. It was the first time for a long time the boy had heard a friendly word, and he was just as pleased about that as he was about the raw fish. At first he thought it was probably impossible to eat, but then he felt like trying all the same. His sheath knife was no bigger than a matchstick, but it was good enough for scaling the fish, and it wasn't long before the perch had all gone. It would have been to my credit if I had gone with them to Lapland and shown them that even a tame goose can manage, the gander said when the boy had swallowed the very last bit. But I can't manage on my own on such a long journey. Would you come with me and help? I will take you back home again in the autumn. The boy thought they ought to turn back as soon as possible, though of course it would be good to escape having to face mother and father for a little while longer. He was about to answer yes, when all the wild geese came soaring up from the lake in a long line, the leader goose at the head. They were much smaller than the tame goose, and their feathers were gray with a touch of brown. Their yellow eyes shone as if a fire were burning inside them, and it was clear from their big feet that they never asked what they were trampling on. They dipped their necks, and the gander did the same. Then they stood for a long time, greeting each other. Finally, the leader goose said, "May we hear what kind of creature you are who wants to be with the wild geese? You're not much good at flying, but perhaps you can swim and run." "My name's Martin, and I come from West Vemenhog. I can't run, and I have never swum farther than across a ditch. But I want to show you that we tame geese are also quite capable," replied the gander, although he was now sure the leader goose would take him with them. "You answer bravely, so perhaps you can become a good traveling companion. Stay with us for a few days, and we can see what you will do. But who is it that you have with you? Is he from the gnome family?" Martin did not want to reveal that the boy was human. "His name's Tom Thumb, and he's a goose herd. He'd probably be useful to have on the journey." Great age had made the leader goose gray and worn, but her eyes shone more clearly and somehow more youthfully than the eyes of the others. She said grandly, "I am Aka from Kebnekaskjes. Over there, Yixi from Vasijerne, and Kaksi from Nuolja. And these are Kolme, Nelja, Visi, and Kusi. The other 6 goslings are also mountain geese from the very best families. We don't share our sleeping places with anyone who doesn't say what family he comes from." The boy quickly stepped forward and bowed. "I am Nils Holgersson, and until today I was a human being. But this morning," the wild geese immediately started back 3 steps, hissing angrily, "Get away from here! We can't stand human beings!" "Surely you aren't afraid of a little creature like that," said the gander, to keep the peace. The leader goose was obviously finding it difficult to hide her terror. "I have learnt to fear all human beings," she said, "but if you stand guarantor for this one, then he can stay the night with us. We're going to sleep on that ice out there." "You are wise to choose such a safe place to sleep in," said Martin, refusing to be scared away. "But tomorrow I'll be leaving you, for I've promised not to abandon him." "Do as you like," said Aka. Then she flew out onto the ice, all the wild geese following her and settling down with their beaks under their wings. The boy was both appalled and afraid, but all Martin said was, "Gather up some brushwood and dry grass, as much as you can carry." When the boy had his arms full, the gander took him in his beak and flew out onto the ice. He then settled on the dry grass so as not to freeze to the ice, and pushed the boy under his wing. "You'll be comfortable there," he said. At the next moment, the boy was fast asleep. He was so tired, but he was warm and cozy.